Every book has a moment before the page. A decision, a risk, a story worth telling. This is Authors After Action. Conversations with authors about the journey, the work, and the lessons learned along the way.
And welcome everybody to Authors After Action. Today's guest is John David, a longtime public relations and crisis communications consultant, corporate ghostwriter, and award-winning author. His debut novel, The Bystander, took home the 2025 Page Turner Award for Mystery and has already made waves in the thriller world. When he's not writing or walking, John enjoys fishing, talking, politics, and cheering on the Florida Gators. We will not hold that against him, so everybody calm down. He and his wife, Pamela, live in Pinecrest, Florida. John, welcome to the show. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm looking forward to this. You know, that conversation we had before made me feel a little bad. I hadn't had time to completely go through your book, man, but I definitely will be purchasing it after this conversation that we just had. So why don't we dig into a little bit of your early stages real quick? What brought you to wanting to be an author?
Well, I've been a writer my whole life. You know, I've primarily been a public relations consultant. You know, that's my profession, and that's what I still do for a living. I started right after I got out of school. I went to journalism school at the University of Florida, where I became a rabid Gator fan. And you can say whatever you want. I can take it. I can dish it out, and I can take it.
Absolutely.
So and I was always really I was always very interested in journalism, and I ended up being a PR consultant, and a lot of you pitch journalists, you talk to journalists a lot, and so and that's where my writing really was writing traditional marketing type stuff. And in 2016 I wrote a business book about online reputation issues, and then about I guess it's about 3 years ago I had an idea for a novel. And there was kind of like this inciting incident that happened, and it kind of really caught my attention. And I decided, I was going to try to write a novel. And I'd never written any fiction before, but I read a ton of fiction, and I used to read. Before I got married, I read a lot of like thrillers and stuff. And then once my kids kind of went away to college, I kind of rediscovered novels and rediscovered mysteries and thrillers. And so I just had this idea that I thought could be the backdrop for a novel, and I'm just crazy enough to do it. So I did it.
Yeah. It's funny, right? Because when I wrote my first book, I didn't even set out to write a book. I wrote a document for my family, kind of explaining all the things that I'd gone through that I never shared with them from combat. So I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's what made it really even more difficult on me. My daughter convinced me to publish it. So when I started the editing process, I didn't realize that how many times I was going to have to reread this book over and over and over again. Right. And it took me a year to complete the first draft of it, just because I kept setting it down. When you started writing this novel, what were some of the things that you ran into? You were like, oh, holy cow, I won't do it this way next time.
Well, I think that there's a couple of things, I guess. The first one would be they really say there's sort of two types of writers when it comes to planning. There's plotters and there's pantsers. And these are what I'm talking about, novels. And the plotters are, outliners who try to figure out the whole story and, sometimes, write, I guess, extensive outlines. And then there's pantsers, for which it's a group that I reside within, who kind of just go with the flow and let the things come to them, let the ideas come to them. And for me, like there's a couple of parts of this. The first one is that when I had the idea to write my novel, I just started to do it. And part of it was I'm going to try to start and see what I can do and see where I can go. And if I wrote this massive outline, I might intimidate myself. So I'll just start and go and see what happens. Now what I've learned since then is that it's probably better to plot out a little bit more. And so like my second book, I did write more of an outline. I did have a better feel for it. I did, of how to, get from one place to another, but it's still the process of kind of getting through the journey is what I find creatively interesting, and where kind of my ideas come from. Kind of going through the story over and over again. And it's like, okay, right now, here's where I am. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? What happens after that? And then those kind of the fun kind of plot twists emerge, when I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct, because my mistakes kind of put me in that category. My second book, I wrote the book and did not worry about spelling. I did not worry about grammar. I didn't worry about anything. I worried about putting content on the page and figuring, when I'm done, we'll go back and edit, and that's when we can worry about that stuff. Which was not what I did for the first book, and it drugged things out. It made it harder. I think the way you do things, flow runs so much better that way. The flow of the novel kind of goes because you're putting your ideas on paper as their ideas, and they're coming. And during the editing process, you just go back and kind of tie in the scenes, with each other. I think that way works better. And is that kind of way you found too?
I think so. I mean, I think part of it is that there's for every writer has their own process and their own what makes them go, And so like I've heard, I've told this story before, but like I either read it or I heard an interview or something that James Patterson, who's like the most prolific, biggest author in the world right now and has been for a long time, that he once wrote like a 100-page outline for a novel that he chose not to write. And I can't even imagine that,
Yeah.
but I guess he's a big plotter. And so who am I to argue with James Patterson? And then there's other writers who talk about it's not the writing, it's the rewriting, and like, it's like getting the word on the page, but then where the real magic happens for them is when they go back and rewrite and change things.
Yeah.
For me, I really like to get, I'm probably these days doing less of the rewriting and more towards what you're saying. And then I really want to get the story. I'm really like story. And then I can kind of come back and work a little bit more on the nuance.
Yep.
And so that's, but I think everybody's a little bit different. For me, planning it out a little bit better has made the process smoother. And it's helped me kind of budget my time and all those things in a better way. Like I have an idea of like, okay, I'm going to try to get, this is how long the book's going to be. This is how many words I got to get. This is where I've got to go. Here's and to me, it's like for me, my books are generally in a bit of a 3-act structure. It's not hard 3-act structure. Mm-hmm. But usually what's the tricky part for me is the middle. And then once I get through the middle and I kind of like, I'm like the horse that can see the barn. I'm like, oh, now I know where I'm going. I'm really good once I get to the middle section. And so I'm actually working on the third book in my series, and I'm in the middle, and not really happy right now because I got a lot to figure out. So, waiting to get around that corner. But it's all, it's everybody has their own process.
Yeah. With you coming with a background from public relations, what skills did that bring forward to help you with your writing career? What was one thing that you could say, hey, I learned how to do this in my career and it has carried over into my writing?
Well, I think just the act of doing it, right? So I had an idea when I was like in my 20s for a novel, and I started to write it way back when, and it was a sort of I had kind of a clever premise. I thought it was a clever premise. It's not a clever premise anymore. It's like timed out. But I didn't have the ability to write it. Like I had the idea. I just didn't have the talent. And there's a story, there's a famous story. There was a book, and if you ever, there was a book that became a movie. It was called Primary Colors. I don't know if you remember that book on that movie or not, but it was basically a novel that was sort of loosely based on the Bill Clinton campaign and
Okay.
Bill Clinton and his dalliances, and all that stuff. And when the Primary Colors came out, it was written by anonymous. It was anonymous, and so all of Washington was trying to figure out who wrote the book. And I remember that they went to this lady who was Clinton's first press secretary. Her name was Dee Dee Myers, and she worked on his campaign and everything else. And all these reporters are going around. They basically cornered Dee Dee Myers, and they said, did you write Primary Colors? And she kind of looked at him and said, listen, I had the access to all that information. I just didn't have the talent to write it. And so for me, I didn't have the talent. And so I built the talent over years of writing for my job. And so I wrote lots of articles, I wrote lots of blog posts, I wrote lots of speeches, I wrote lots of communications plans, all that kind of stuff. And that's what enabled me to become a better writer, over that span of that period of time, 30 years of writing for all different types of things. And that's what I really drew from my career. And then my main character is a television reporter. I've never been a television reporter, but I know like hundreds of reporters. So I know that world. And so that's where I drew upon my career of knowing journalists and understanding the pressures they're under and how that world's shifting right now. And that helped me with my book.
That makes really good sense because that the importance is the same thing. At the end of the day, it's about being relatable to the people that you're writing for, to, and so forth. So that makes sense how that would carry over. And then, when you say talent, I assume you're talking about the technical side of writing, and that stuff is definitely learnable. So it makes perfect sense. Your book, The Bystander, I want to dig into a little bit of this is the main book that we're talking about. When I wrote my first fiction book, I'm a very detailed oriented person, right? I picture my characters and I like to know the way they would have talked and the things that they would have liked and so forth. And a lot of times when I'm writing, I don't really know where they're going. I build their charisma and their character and I let it just kind of go in my head. When you built your character line, did you have that same kind of thought process of let me picture these people and kind of get to know them and then I'll write about them?
Absolutely. You kind of envision what this person, what they look like. You envision what their kind of worldview is.
Yeah.
I've, and so that's a big part of it is that you create a character. And, sometimes there's characters I sort of picture in my head, and there's sometimes I just, I've stolen characteristics from different people and assigned them to different characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I really try to focus as much as I can on the story and keeping the story moving. And so I'm probably not as descriptive as I could be. I'm trying to get better at that. And to paint the picture of what these, what everybody looks like and what they act like and how they, how they walk and they talk and all those things. And I'm kind of hopefully getting better at that. But I really focus heavy on just making sure the story, moves.
Yeah. I think a lot of that comes from life experiences, and this is just an assumption on my part, but I think, for me, what made that ability to kind of be able to tie those together is being 20 years in the military. It's just a big melting pot. So I dealt with people from the East Coast, the West Coast, from people that were not from the United States. And when you hang out with those people and you're seeing them daily and daily, you start to learn their little sayings and nuances and stuff like that. And I can draw back onto that stuff. So I think a lot of that comes along with those types of things. I would say that's the only part of my book that I kind of outlined was, I would write about a character and kind of get an idea. And throughout my book, I found myself a lot of times going back and just rereading what I wrote about this character and then asking myself, is that really something that they would have done? Is that how they would have handled that? And maybe I got too deep into the weeds doing it, but I really felt like that was a lot of the fun from my one and only fiction book I wrote. Rest of them are all nonfiction books, but
right. I think one of the things that writing is it's a solitary thing.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's when you can find the fun part, like that's really important, Yeah. And so my book has, a number of kind of like, inside jokes in it that only a few people will get.
Yeah.
I have an homage to a friend of mine who passed away in my book, and I've got that homage in, it repeats in the second book and it repeats again in the third book because I just I wanted to do that, Yeah. And it's like for me, and it's a couple of sentences, but it means a lot to me. And I think you have to find the fun, when you're doing it, because otherwise it's just a slog, and there's no, and when there's no joy, it comes through. If you're not enjoying what you're writing, how can you expect somebody to enjoy it? How can you expect someone to enjoy reading it? If it's not, if it feels like you're writing a textbook or whatever, you're going to, guess what? It's going to come across as if you're writing a textbook.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think, that same advice kind of carries over into the podcasting world. I have a lot of people that reach out to me and they're saying, hey, what's the biggest thing I need to know about this podcast I'm about to start? And I said, the most important part is that you care about what it is that you're talking about.
Sure.
If you're doing a podcast about a topic that you just can't stand, I can't even imagine myself doing a podcast about English literature. That's just not something that I could really handle.
Sure.
But,
sure. Yeah, that's the thing. You write you write about what you know. I mean,
Yep.
and then it's like, it's the old, not old, actually, the Ted Lasso thing, be curious.
Yeah. Yep.
Be curious.
I think that's another part. I love having guests on and learning from, their life stories and the things that they went through. I want to dig a little bit further down. I know we talked before the show, about where the storyline kind of came from. That event that you were talking about that kind of resonated. What was it about that situation that said, hey, I really need to turn this into a book?
Sure. I appreciate the question. So I'm going to tell you the story and then hopefully that'll help answer the question. So so there were two things that happened to me this was back in 2022. Summer of 2022. The first one was I had a barbecue at my house, and I ended up, when people over at my house. My birthday's in the summertime. It's in South Florida. It's always hot, so we're always inside. And I end up in my kitchen, and I'm having a conversation with my brother and my brother-in-law. And my brother and my brother-in-law, they're both veterans. They're both gun guys. Mm-hmm. My brother hunts, and my brother-in-law sells knives and tchotchkes at the gun shows. He's a veteran. He served for I don't know, almost 20 years, and was in Vietnam and all over the world, and is an interesting guy. Anyway, so we're having this conversation. We're talking about guns, and mm-hmm. I'm not a gun owner. I understand gun rights. I get the the Second Amendment. It's in the Constitution, right to bear arms, all that stuff. I get it. I completely get it. But I was just asking them about, does everybody need a gun? Do we need this many guns? Just kind of these questions, and if you have, I don't know if you have a brothers or if you have brothers-in-law, but the way that conversation really went was my brother and my brother-in-law explaining to me how I was wrong. they're explaining to me how I don't know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so we have this conversation, and I learned a little bit about the gun show loophole, and I learned a little bit about the philosophically what happens with when there's these different types of events go on. So that was number one. And then the second thing that happened was in July of 2022, there was an incident at a mall in Indiana. A guy went into a mall in Indiana with a assault rifle, and he started shooting, and he killed 3 people. But what happened next was truly remarkable. There was a young man in the food court having lunch. His name is Eli Dickin, and Eli Dickin is a concealed carry guy and a marksman, and he had his handgun, and he took out his gun and he shot and killed the active shooter. And first things first, Eli Dickin is a hero. I mean, a real hero, right? I mean, you probably know some real heroes. I don't know if I know any real heroes. This guy's a real hero, right? We say, we throw the word hero around a lot, oh yeah, like I got the garbage out on time. I'm a hero. This guy's a real hero, So that's the first thing. But then the second thing was I was looking at this whole situation. I was like, this is an amazing story. But there's so many layers here. It's like, first things first, should we have to bring a gun to go to the mall? I mean, do we have to be armed when we go to the mall? That doesn't seem quite right. Are we doing a little bit of this, is it a little bit too Wild West? And, and why does this guy have this big, powerful gun and why going in the mall? Right. So it's that, which is the argument, conversation, whatever we're having too frequently in America, right? Yep. Because of gun violence, right? So anyway, I just thought this was really interesting. I read everything I could find about this incident, and then I thought to myself, this could be the backdrop for a novel because of just the complexity of all this, because of the issue, and then what happened, and the drama of this happening. And so I started to write, and my novel starts with a television reporter who is out in the field on a Friday night filming like a feel-good, fun story before a big football game. And then he's at a retail complex, and in comes a guy with an assault rifle. And the television reporter turns his camera around, films the thing, dives for cover, films the thing. And it turns out that the active shooter is killed by an armed bystander. And that's how the novel starts. And that spoils nothing for anyone, because that's basically it's the intro to the story. It's the story, there's a big ship, it hits an iceberg and it sinks. That's the story. We know the story. So anyways, this happens. So that's the setup. But the thing here is, Don, is that all is not as it seems. Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. So the story goes viral, and all is not as it seems. And that's where the book kind of starts to go. And so that's the setup for the novel.
I think you hit on a lot of topics that are the real sub problems of that conversation that you were having. I am a gun guy. I believe in guns, but I also believe in common sense. And I don't believe that I have to have a bunch of AR rifles around in today's world. Right?
Yeah. I preach on, man. I'm right with you.
And it's one thing to have a couple because you enjoy shooting and it's hobby or whatever. But our founding fathers created that out of necessity. You needed a rifle for food. You don't need a cannon to go hunting. And that's the whole point. I do have a concealed carry license, and I'll be honest, I very rarely carry. I don't need a gun to go to Walmart in a small little town, and so forth. And I think that's where one of the problems came from. And you kind of hit that in that book as well with that topic line, because in that particular case, the person that was armed did the right thing, became the hero in real life and in your story. And at the end of the day, you hit on another problem that has caused all this, and that's mental health. And that's where the sub problem really lies. You know, our gun laws could be adjusted and fixed, but that's not going to solve the problem. If people that are having mental health issues can still have access to guns, your story is going to continue over and over and over again. And that's where the real problem goes. When you wrote this book, when did that side of that thought process come into this, that, hey, you know, I'm also kind of hitting on a little bit of mental health here as well?
So there's another kind of line here. So, and I guess this is a bit of a spoiler alert type of part of things, but given who you are and what you like to talk about and what your experiences are, I'm just gonna talk about it. So the first thing is I didn't set out to write about these issues. So that's number one. I used these. I find the gun issue to be fascinating, and I have lots of different thoughts on it. You know, and I'm not like anti-gun or anything like that. I just believe that there's a line that we've drawn, and we should probably think about where that line, maybe we can move it. That's just the big thing. And also I have like a good friend of mine is a retired ATF guy, and whenever we would, his son and my son were in the Boy Scouts together, and we used to go on these camping trips. I was a scout leader, so I had my son and 3 other boys were in my Boy Scout group and Boy Scout patrol, and they all became Eagle Scouts. So I'm really proud of that. One of the other Eagle Scout dads is a former ATF guy, and we would talk about we would be having a conversation, camping trip, and something with some active shooter stuff would come up, and he would go, "I wish I was there." You know, and I would go, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, I could do something. I could stop something like that." You know, I was like, that's really interesting. Like there's guys who are like, who I never thought about. I never dreamed of something like that. And then I've also talked to people who, you know, recreationally have guns, and they're like, you know, most people have no idea how to handle a gun. You know, the last thing you want to do is give a teacher a gun who's never been trained, because they're not going to know what to do. They don't know how loud it is. Like just stuff like that. So all those things kind of come in and blend in. And then several years ago, I got a call from a guy, a lawyer in California, and he was involved with a lawsuit, and he wanted to publicize this lawsuit. And that's one of the things that I do for my career, right? One of my business lines is I publicize lawsuits, and it involved a veteran. And the story was this. There was a veteran. He was injured while he was in the service. He wasn't like in combat, but he was like injured, you know, while he was working on a base, right? And he had ongoing pain management issues, right? And the guy was doing fine, doing well in his life. He was managing his issues. And then his doctor changed, and his prescriptions got all screwed up, right? For his pain meds. He wasn't getting his pain meds the way he needed them. He's at a VA hospital outside Atlanta, and on a Friday, trying to get his medicine, his pain meds prescription renewed, and he couldn't get it done on time. And he was distraught because he knew he was going to be in pain for until Monday, basically. And he killed himself in the parking lot of the VA hospital. And the reason that I know about this is because the family, what ended up happening was that the guy called his family and told him what he was going to do while he was in the parking lot of the VA hospital. And his family members called the VA hospital switchboard, which was run by a private company. And they said, "There's a suicidal guy in the parking lot." And the switchboard operators did not pass this information on to the security guards at the VA hospital, because the VA hospital security guards are actually trained to deal with these types of situations and de-escalate these types of situations. So the family sued the company that ran the switchboard company, and they wanted a settlement for $1 million, which went to the estate of the deceased veteran. And stories like that stick with you,
Yeah.
And so kind of co-opted some of that stuff into my novel.
Yeah.
And it's gotten, it's drawn attention to that issue a little bit. I've had a lot of veterans who have said that they were appreciated the way that I treated that. And so it's again, kind of looking at your real world experience and using it to help you tell a story. And so, and as I researched, as I learned more about that issue, I learned that it's like an epidemic. I had never heard anything about such things. And when I wrote my news release about this 5 years ago or whatever it was, but when I was researching that topic to try to like weave some of that into my novel, I was like, oh my God, there's so many stories about this. There's so much. This is an unbelievable scenario that's happening over and over again for veterans in America. And so, I touch on some of those issues in my novel.
Yeah. I thank you for sharing that, because you are 100% correct. And even myself, when I was getting out of the military, I was already planning suicide, before I'd even walked out, and just thanking God, things didn't work out that way, and I'm still here.
Wow.
But it is, I've learned a lot about that situation. And one of the things that has brought to my attention is some of our training in the military is just a double-edged sword. We're given all the tools that we need to survive combat and horrible situations. It's just those same tools don't work when you are no longer in those situations anymore. So, the one emotion in our toolbox that we all had was anger.
Right. Interesting.
And, I think some of that thought process is if you're not going to help me, I will teach you. And they just end their pain right there in the parking lot and put the blame, on the people that are in another situation, and I'm not taking sides on either side of this. It's a horrible situation. And the VA is overwhelmed, and the veterans are under taken care of, and it's just a really horrible situation. But at the end of the day, I learned that PTSD is a human problem, not just a veteran issue. And I didn't think of it that way when I first started going through this. It blew my mind. And then I started going down these rabbit holes, like what you're talking about, and wondering if, the people that I was fighting against, are they dealing with PTSD as well? And that's when I realized, man, this is a human problem. It's a human reaction to a horrible situation. And, maybe the triggers are different, but the symptoms are real similar. So yeah, I appreciate the way you've handled this in your book. And I'm definitely going to buy the book as soon as we get done here. But it is a tough situation. And
yeah, in the end, I just kind of to hit a little bit of a reset button. It's a work of fiction. Number one, I wrote a book. Right. It's a novel. It's supposed to it's entertaining more than anything else. It's got plenty of funny stuff in it too. So I don't want to just, all those things. I just, but again, like kind of like we talked about before we came on the air here, as I felt I'd be remiss if I didn't address that with you specifically. And obviously what you just told me, says that I made the right. I feel like I made the right decision. And it's and then there's some of these issues. Some things are, and I think that what ends up happening in storytelling is that when there's kernels of reality in there, it makes it more interesting. And that's one of the things that that my kind of marketing of my books is, that I write these kind of like ripped from the headlines type of stories.
Yeah.
And because for me it's interesting, and I'm a news junkie and a news hound and political, I love politics. I try to keep my mouth shut as much as I can these days, because everything's so divisive and everything's so political. But but at the same time, it's like there's so much out there, so much interest. There's so many interesting things happening, in the world that and there's a lot of material out there if you want to write a mystery novel or a thriller novel. There's lots of interesting stuff you can talk about.
And again, these are modern topics, and for years, way before our time, fiction has been used to teach lessons all the time.
Yeah.
Don't go in the woods alone. That's where the monsters live,
Right.
All the way down to for our kids, those kind of stories are out there. So fiction and storytelling is been part of ways to teach as well. So absolutely. I know we're kind of getting into the top of the time frame here, but I want to dig in just a little bit more on a few other things.
You got it, man. I'm yours. Fire away.
So how do you balance a demanding professional life with your creative work? I know for me, I'm retired, so it wasn't hard. I woke up, sat on the couch and wrote, but, when you're working full time and then have to come home and writing is just one of those creative things that it is important that you are in that mood, to write. You can't just treat it like a job and say, okay, from 8 to 5, I'm going to write. And regardless of what happens, I'm done at 5 o'clock. How did you balance that?
Well, I mean, I work from, I've been a self-employed consultant for a long time. So I've been working from home since the pandemic. So I have a lot of flexibility. And I kind of work on my fiction when I have time, and that's really, it's like if I'm feeling inspired, sometimes I'll steal some time during the work day. If I'm feeling inspired, I do a lot. I kind of have my own process, and most of it's I think a lot of the creative stuff happens kind of earlier in the day, before I get rolling. And then I may be sitting, and whatever, watching a football game and rewriting, going through and, sort of doing two things at once. And then once I get closer to the end, like what I was describing to you before, like once I'm kind of closer to the end, then I'll really, start to I might, carve out a full day here and there to get everything done. I'm still sadly, I wish I wasn't like this. I'm still very deadline driven person. Yeah. And so I wish I was more. I wish I could sit there and say, "Oh yeah, no, I write 1,000 words every morning. I get up at 5 o'clock, and I can't. I don't do that. I'm not that." Yeah. Those folks, bless them, man. Good for them. And we're just not. I'm just not wired. Like I'm just not wired that way.
Yeah, I had that same issue. I one of those things I Googled was what is the best scheduling for writing, and it measured everything in words. You should try to get X number of words done a day. And maybe that's great for teaching how to become an author or something like that, but realistically, life is going to dictate, and some days you're going to have more and some days you're going to have less, and you take what you get and you make the best of it. So it makes perfect sense to me, man.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's hard to do. It's I try to do that. It's like, for me, it's been hard because, so I wrote my first novel, and I was written, and then I was trying to get it published, and I started on the second one, and I stopped and started and rewrote the beginning and rewrote it a bunch of times for different reasons. And then once I signed on with my publisher, there was a year basically before my book, The Bystander, came out. So I was signed in September or October of 2024, and my book came out at the end of September of 2025. So I had a year in between, and I'd already started the second book, and I had to turn that one in actually back in March. So, and now I'm working on the third one, and that one's due in a few months, and I'm starting to perspire over that deadline. But that's, it's been, my publisher's been very gracious. They gave me some extra time, and mainly because I've spent since basically, since August, I've been promoting the first book, so I had my spare time has been consumed with, promoting the book, and I've done, some signings, I'm doing podcasts and things like that. Yeah. So, I mean, theoretically I could be writing right now, and I'm not. So, but anyway, but it's because I'm promoting, it is right now. I really, I feel like I have two jobs. I'm basically working two jobs right now.
Yeah,
but it's fine. It's not exhausting to me. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes perfect sense. I want to end on a fun note. Let me ask you this. If you could take your book and sit down and discuss it with one person, alive or dead, who would you like to share that book with? So I've had this. So there's variants of this question, right? Yeah. There's the question of, okay, like who would you, if you could have I've been asked the question, like, if you could have like dinner with three people, living or dead, who would they be? Yeah. And so I answered that question with those three people. One would be my mother, who's passed away 20 years ago. Right. So that's probably my answer. I would love to share this with my mother, because my mother was a teacher, and my mother, I think, instilled in me a lot of what I became as a writer. The second person was Steve Spurrier, the greatest Florida Gator of all time. And the third was dovetailing to something you and I actually talked about earlier, is Thomas Jefferson. Okay. Yeah. Because I would love to get Thomas Jefferson's thoughts on like the political scene in America in 2026. So yeah. Absolutely. If I only had one, it'd probably be my mother. I dedicated my book to my mother. My main character in my book has a interesting, my main character's mother is a big character in the book. Nothing like my mother, but so that'd probably be my mom. If I had to choose, that would be the one. Yep. Okay. Well, if you don't mind sharing with everybody, John, can you tell everybody where they can follow you and get your books and learn when your new ones are going to come out? Absolutely. So my website is called byjohndavid.com. So byjohndavid.com. It's a Substack. So it has reviews and events and links to buy the book and everything there. I'm also on Instagram at by John David, and Facebook by John David. And my book's available kind of, where books are sold, primarily online. It's not going to be in your bookstore, but you can order it from your local bookstore. Some folks have done that. So you can order it from Barnes & Noble or from your local bookshop. And also, the online outlets. So there's, the ebook versions on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all that. And then the other thing I like to push is bookshop.org. If you're not familiar with bookshop.org, they when you buy a book at bookshop.org, a portion of the proceeds go to your local bookstore. So when you to buy a book, you go to bookshop.org, and it'll tell you pick your local bookshop. And if you buy a $20 book at bookshop.org, it'll give like $2 to your local bookshop. So if you're in the giving mood, I would order it. I would, and you want a hard copy, I'd order it from bookshop.org, and you'd help a lot of folks in that way. Well, that is awesome. I didn't even know about that. So see, I learned something. There we go. There you go. Absolutely. Well, John, I'm here to serve. Absolutely, man. I appreciate you coming on the show and
Thank you.
sharing your book. And I know we didn't get into, I meant to hit it, but I wanted to say congratulations on your award that you won for the book. And
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I've gotten some, I've gotten a lot of great feedback, and it's always, it's great to get some recognition. It's
absolutely,
nice.
man. It's not easy to do, so it says a lot. So
I
I
appreciate
want
that.
all of y'all to make sure, man, go and pick up his book. The links are in the description. So make sure you click one and purchase it. I will make sure that the link is also there for the store that you were just talking about. And I want everybody to know, don't stop reading. Enjoy, take care, and have a great day.
You've been listening to Authors After Action, a podcast from the Barracks Media Network. Thanks to our guest for sharing their story, and thank you for listening. You can explore more conversations like this across the Barracks Media Network. We'll see you next time.